Good afternoon, everyone. We will start the webinar in 1 minute. Good afternoon, and welcome to today's webinar. This is John Torres with NCBA CLUSA. Today's webinar, Managing Finances and Cash During Crisis. This webinar is hosted by the National Cooperative Business Association and Shared Capital Cooperative in partnership with the National Cooperative Bank, the Federation of Southern Cooperatives, the U.S. Federation of Worker Cooperatives, and Key Figures Cooperative. This webinar will provide advice and resources to help small and mid-sized cooperatives navigate the financial challenges caused by the COVID-19 pandemic. Our members will offer, or rather our presenters will offer guidance on mitigating potential business interruptions, and NCBA CLUSA will provide an update on potential federal economic disaster assistance legislation that will impact cooperative businesses. This webinar is scheduled for 1 hour. Before we begin, just a bit of housekeeping. Participant phone lines will be muted during this presentation to reduce background noise. There will be a chance to propose questions, just not verbally. If you have a question, please type it into the question box on the GoToWebinar control panel on your screen. Questions will be collected and answered following the presentation as time allows. NCBA CLUSA will be recording this program, and it will be archived on our website. You will receive an email containing a link to the post by the end of the week. We are also in process of coordinating the production of this same webinar for our Spanish-speaking cooperators. Information on the date and time of that webinar will be provided in the next couple of days. Now, with all that said, I'll turn the webinar over to our moderator, President and CEO of the National Cooperative Business Association, CLUSA International, Doug O'Brien. Doug?
Good afternoon, or good morning, everyone. This is Doug O'Brien. I'm the President and CEO of NCBA CLUSA. Thank you for taking the time to join this webinar today, and I'd like to thank Christina Jennings and Shared Capital Cooperative for bringing us this idea and for co-hosting. I'd also like to thank the other presenters that we'll get to hear from in just a moment. I think John Torres, covered the housekeeping. I'll just want to emphasize that we have at NCBA CLUSA created a website that's very easily found on our homepage with resources that are, related directly to the COVID-19 situation we all find ourselves in. First, I do want to say to all the cooperators and everyone on the phone today, I hope everyone is safe and healthy. We're thinking of everyone, and particularly those on the front lines, those grocery store clerks, others in the food system, home care workers, rural electric cooperatives, others who are continuing to work and making sure that the rest of us can access those critical services and goods. Today, the focus, as John mentioned, is about how to manage finances through this time, through this crisis. We have a number of experts with us today. First, we will hear a little bit about, and just very briefly, on how the crisis is affecting some of our cooperatives here in the United States. And then we'll move on to talk about some of the tactics, some of the questions that people can ask to make sure that they are doing whatever they can to prepare and work through this crisis time. So I'd like first to go to Christina Jennings from Shared Capital Cooperative to talk a little bit about the impact of COVID-19 on cooperatives. Christina.
Thanks, Doug, and great to have everyone joining today to talk about this. I think we are seeing, and I could try to put my webcam on. Let's see if it works. And we're seeing a lot of different challenges among the co-ops we work with. So we're hearing about co-ops that have had to close because of orders from within their state or their city. We're seeing those that their business is significantly disrupted. Of course, we're also at the same time seeing some businesses like the grocery that are being stretched to, being asked to provide services at a level that they've never had to provide. And under really difficult conditions. So I think those are the main things. We're getting lots of calls from folks who are already anticipating significant financial impact and questions about their ability to operate. And of course, we're all uncertain about how long this will last. So those are, at a high level, that's what we're seeing. I want to leave room for others to share their detailed insights. So I'll stop there.
Thank you, Christine. Next, I'd like to on tap here, we have Cornelius Blanding with the Federation for Southern Cooperatives. I'm not sure if he's been able to join yet, so I'm going to put Mo Mankling with the U.S. Federation. There you are, Cornelius. Hello, brother. Good to see you. So Cornelius, please share with us some of the things that you're seeing on impact of COVID-19.
Can everybody hear me?
Yeah, you sound good. We can hear you, Cornelius.
Okay, thank you.
Yes, sir.
First of all, Doug, thank you, and NCBA, Christina and Shared Capital, thank you, and the other co-hosts for really putting something like this on. Let me speak from two levels. And first of all, let me say, I've asked Ben Burkett to join by phone if possible, so you can hear from a very direct voice as part of my presentation. I don't know if he's on or not, but if he is,
I'm on.
Okay, so Ben, I'll give a very high level view of this and then ask Ben to just jump in briefly so you can hear directly from him. Ben Burkett is the state coordinator for our Mississippi office, but he's also a farmer, and he's also a member of one of the co-ops that's a member of the Federation. So I think his voice is a direct voice and very much appreciated. But let me speak again about this from a very high level. First of all, as a federation, we are a federation of cooperatives or a cooperative of cooperatives. And it impacts us directly because we specifically have a city ordinance we're in East Point, Georgia. So we've had to shut our office down and all of the staff to figure out how to work from home. We're also making plans to shut all of our other offices in the various other states, including Georgia, Mississippi, Alabama, and et cetera, shut those down. And so our challenge is trying to figure out how do we maintain direct communication with our members, our member of cooperatives and farmers. How do we continue to do the work, and how do we as a federation manage our cash? Much of our work is centered around public government funding, USDA in particular. And so as USDA and the government overall manage this challenge, it affects us because it determines how we get paid, and if we do, when we get paid, because we're submitting things to other people who are impacted by this. So we're trying to figure out how do we do this, how do we work with our members from the phone, via email, and other ways, and build systems around that can accommodate the new way of working right now. And it's new for us, and so it's impacting how we work, how we communicate, but it's also impacting how we get paid and how we will pay our staff. But it filters down to our cooperatives, and again, which I've asked Ben to talk here, because we have cooperatives who have physical facilities, and Ben will speak more on this from the standpoint of Mississippi, where there's 3 physical facilities, 3 processing and or retail facilities that are in those local areas that are being closed down or shut down or having trouble directly working with its consumers who have been cut short because of the crisis. And so now, Ben, I ask you just to kind of talk directly about the impact there on the co-op directly.
Thank you, Mr. Cudney and Mr. O'Brien, for having the opportunity to be on. And Mr. Blandford stated 3 cooperatives here in Mississippi and 1 in Louisiana that have physical places of operation. And our primary marketing place was in the South, in Mobile and New Orleans. What happened since there's no more farmers market, we were selling to several high-end restaurants that's closed and the co-op store in New Orleans. So our ability to generate income is almost cutting down to 60 to 70% because of the virus. So what we've been doing is staying in contact with these cooperatives. I sent Mr. Bannon a detailed report of the situation. And with no income, we have no ability to keep our lights on, pay the bills, so to say. But we're also working, trying to do something a little different. Some of the buyers in New Orleans is buying some of our produce, but we have to pre-package it. We have to put everything in sealed bags and deliver it to one site in New Orleans. We're trying to possibly try one delivery like next week. We're packing our farmers too because it's planting season for us. So we don't know what the marketing place is going to look like 60 and then 90 days out, but we're going to plant because it's a seasonal thing. It's time to plant, but it's affecting our cooperative and our cooperative members.
Yeah. Thank you, Ben. Ben, good to hear your voice. Good to be with you in Mississippi a couple of weeks ago, right before this all came on us. Cornelius, thank you. As we continue this conversation, that kind of brief summaries on the impact of COVID-19, we'll go to Mo Mankling with the U.S. Federation of Worker Cooperatives.
Hi, everybody. I'm glad that everybody is able to make it today. This is some really important stuff because I think within the worker co-op sector, particularly, we're finding that it's getting really, really difficult because, with the worker co-op, we have the issue of not just taking care of the workers and the business itself, but the workers are actually the owners and are, because of that, excluded from some of the worker protections that are being put in place. So right now, a lot of the impact is around trying to understand how all of the workers, including the owners, are able to access the funds to help not just the business, but also their families and ensure that their financial stability going forward. So one of the really great things about the worker co-op movement, though, is that everybody's very agile and everybody's very accustomed to figuring things out on the fly. So we're doing a lot of connecting online, and we're used to the idea of having a lot of online webinars, as we're all getting very used to, and figuring out ways to connect and support each other to shore up some of our supply chain lines and how to connect some of our food businesses to some of the frontline workers that are doing work out there. So, I mean, the impact is really wide because the average worker co-op is, somewhere between 8 and 9 workers, and it is, so these are they're relatively small businesses, and even the bigger ones like Cooperative Home Care Associates, which is one of the frontline cooperatives, are really feeling the brunt of this because they're needing to understand the regulations around getting even more people, because they're actually needing to hire a lot more in order to cover the need that's happening right now. So yeah, I think that the impact is very far and widespread. And also, I think this is the moment where we're really trying to push forward all of the work that we've already been pushing for with NCBA and a lot of our other national partners to push for things like having cooperatives exempt from the personal guarantee issues, which is a lot of what's making it very difficult right now. So navigating all of those relief funds and including grants and trying to secure applying for loans and trying to secure grants, actually. So I'll talk a little bit more about how we're adjusting later, but that's the report from the worker co-op frontline.
Thank you, Mo. And I think that's a really great point about some of the, it seems to me the worker co-ops are sharing in a lot of the same challenges, but have some unique questions around how to deal with employees. A little bit later on the webinar, we will have Kate Latour, the Director of Government Relations with NCBA CLUSA, who's been working with Mo and so many others in the cooperative community. At this very moment, Kate is reading through the text of what's known as Phase 3, that disaster assistance bill that's just been released 2 minutes before we went live. So Kate's going to be able to give us an update a little bit later. Next, we're going to talk, we'll hand it back to Christina, and she's going to talk a little bit, a few minutes about managing through this crisis. So Christina, please.
Thanks. Thanks again, and it's great to hear how folks the memberships are holding up through this. So a couple of things. I mean, just taking at a really high level that managing through crisis, which we're all kind of making our way through, is, I mean, the most important thing to start with is really to assess the situation, and secondly, right now it's also tightly managing cash to make sure we have enough on hand for our highest priorities, and then frankly, just figuring out how to adapt and adjust to the environment. And we heard that from Mo and from Ben and from Cornelia. So I think we'll hear a little bit more from them about that later. And I want to turn over most of this time to Andy Shively, who is with Key Figures, who's going to talk kind of really in detail about the kinds of tools that you can use. We want to make this as concrete and useful as possible. And so just to frame that up a little bit here, I think starting with this assess, again, it's sort of point 1, to assess your situation, point 2, to tightly manage your cash, and point 3, to adapt and adjust as you need to. In terms of assessing, I think one of the most critical things right now is that things are changing on a daily basis for most of us. And so it's assess and reassess and continue to be agile in doing that. And so, really important for each co-op to understand the impact that that the current situation is having on its members and on the co-op business itself, but also to continue to reevaluate that as it shifts and changes, and try to look ahead and anticipate how it's going to change if this as this goes on. And it's in terms of assessing also to think about what resources there are that you have internally, skill sets, and other types of resources, material or personnel or otherwise, to bring to the situation, and then also looking at what external resources there might be. So the external resources, and if you want to advance the next slide, I think it is to look at external resources, and I appreciate that Kate is going to share with us some of what might be coming out of the stimulus package, see if there's anything in there that folks can be using. Finally, I want to suggest that one tool, and if you can advance one more slide, one tool to use is even a sort of quick and dirty SWOT analysis, or to assess the strengths, weaknesses, opportunities, and threats that are in this moment of crisis. And a quick version of that doesn't need to be fancy, but can help maybe identify opportunities as well as places to focus and priorities. And I think we'll be able to post on. I think we'll be able to post through NCBA a quick SWOT worksheet that you can use after this session. I'd also note that I think one of the most critical things as we're thinking organizationally, as we're working with other co-ops, think about what not only what we're seeing right now, but what if scenarios as we try to assess how long this will drag on. Let me pull in, though, Andy Shively, again with Key Figures, the cooperative workaround firm based out of Austin, Texas. And Andy, let you introduce yourself and also share some of the resources you would recommend folks dig in and use.
Absolutely. Thanks, Christina, and thanks to everybody who put this together on such a short timeline. I really appreciate it. Andy Shively, I'm with Key Figures. We're a worker-owned cooperative that provides bookkeeping, tax prep, and financial management to businesses, nonprofits, and cooperatives across the country. So we're actually going through this exact process right now, assessing with all of our clients what's going on with them so that we can work with them. And really, I'm going to talk just about managing money, really tightly managing your cash in and your cash out when you're trying to manage in a moment of crisis and uncertainty. And so these are tools that we've used in our own business, and these are tools that we recommend for our clients as well. And so they're pretty general kind of concepts. And the first concept is just that collecting, analyzing, and acting on information is super key. All of this is going to be changing very rapidly, as we've talked about, and identifying your cash needs as closely as possible is super important. If you don't have a good sense of when you're going to have a cash shortfall and how big that cash shortfall is going to be, it can be really hard to address that exact problem. You need to know, I need X thousand dollars by X date. And of course, they're projections, they're not perfect, but the closer that you can get, the better. So hopefully everybody already has a pretty good understanding of the rhythms of their cash flow in their own businesses under normal circumstances. So that at least serves as a baseline that we can use to measure against things as they're changing. So if we already know what our normal cash in the door looks like, we can very quickly assess if that normal is no longer the normal. We can look at the extent to that impact. We can look at the changes in time, and we can act accordingly. Time is really just such an essential factor. And at the end, I'll talk about a tool that's specifically really to help assess that, especially kind of for smaller businesses. So really having a good and evolving best guess of how much you're going to need and when, and knowing what actions you can take. What can you control, both to manage money in and to money out? That's where you need to focus your energies. So looking at money in. So first is collecting accounts receivable. So if you're a business that does work, bills clients, has the money come back in, versus a more retail environment where it's going to be a different scenario. You're not going to have as much in the way of accounts receivable, so these tools probably won't apply, though you'll still be able to see the impacts on your kind of daily cash sales receipts or credit card receipts, of course. But so if you do have accounts receivable, the real key here, and this is true in a crisis or not in a crisis, be proactive. Send reminders about your invoices, follow up, reach out with a call if you need to reach out with a call if they're not responding to the emails. We charge late fees if folks don't reach out to us to talk about payment plans that they need to put in place. And we have a procedure for putting folks into collections. Now, I understand in this particular scenario, we want to try to avoid these kinds of things. We need for our customers to continue to be successful and to come out of this crisis successfully, the same way they need the vendors like you that they rely on. So really, I think in this instance, even more so than before, communication is the key. And like really being proactive and reaching out. If you're not hearing from somebody, it's probably because they're having a problem or panicking about it. So really try to make it clear that you can talk to them and figure out what kind of payment plans can be made over time. The other thing about cash in that I'm going to mention is just your available cash is not just your revenues, but it's also what you can access in terms of debt and equity. So we had a cash crunch a while ago, and we were able to identify it thanks to a tool. And then we were able to assess exactly how much we were going to need. And the first thing we did was we went internally to our members and we spoke with our families and friends, and we took on both term loans and some additional equity instruments through preferred shares that shored up our cash position while we got our overall operations moving in a way that allowed us to be cash sustainable over the long term while we paid down those debts. Another option is working with more traditional or just financial institutions at all, like Shared Capital, like NCB, getting lines of credit. If you've got a $25,000 line of credit, that is part of your available cash if you haven't drawn on it yet, getting loans and so on. And I'm sure folks will be talking about that later. And then the last is carrying credit card balances. And the one thing I would really say is just as you're making decisions about where to get your cash, don't prop up a business that's not going to structurally survive. If you need to be making changes to your operations to respond to this crisis in order to get it to stay closer to profitable, do that. Also look at that, but know that in a short term, you can be accessing credit to the extent needed. Just pay attention to the interest rates, obviously. I think these are things folks probably already know. The second half of that, so that's money in. How can we know what money we're going to get in? How can we work to accelerate the timeline on getting that money in? How can we get emergency funds in to shore up operations in the short term while we make adjustments? The other half of that is money out. So this is really about negotiating flexibility. Okay, so with your vendors, with your landlords, with anybody that you have money going out to. So there's lots of programs that are happening with lenders. Different lenders are doing different things. You would need to speak specifically with them about cash payments going out for loans. With vendors, you can negotiate a lot of things. The same way with your accounts receivable, you would negotiate with your clients. Your vendors also could negotiate with you. They also want to see you stay open. So again, communication is key. I think the other important part of that is know your terms and know your contracts. Before you reach out to your vendors, know what you've already agreed to so that you have a sense of how strict their contracts are, whether or not they're charging late fees, what kind of recourse you have if they're not feeling particularly negotiable. And then the third is prioritize. You need to know those things in order to help you prioritize. And specifically, you need to be asking yourself, what of my vendor relationships are replaceable or disruptible and which are not? Who are key vendors that I really can't replace? You can also be assessing their own sustainability as you're prioritizing. You know, in the end, I kind of feel like our staff, our human resources, and the sustainability of our businesses are the most important priorities. And then you got to kind of keep those as your guiding light as you're assessing everything else and negotiating payment plans and terms. So again, that's all negotiation. Time's an important factor. So I don't have too much more time left. The last thing I'll talk about is just this tool. There are lots of cash flow projection softwares out there in the world, and I have yet to find one that I think is a great tool at a good price point for a small business. Really what we do here at Key Figures and what we work with our clients to do is using an Excel tool for really careful cash flow management and cash flow projection. So you kind of have a week by week, a column for week. You have your starting cash balance for the week. You've got your cash in by major categories. So that could be accounts receivable, it could be loans, it could be other supplementary income, whatever it is. And then you've got your cash out by major categories. So that could be, you know, paying the credit card is due this week, or the health insurance payment is due that week, or payroll happens this week, we've got a loan payment that week, and do it week by week. And then that calculates out your projected ending cash balance. So then you can look over the course of your projections for the weeks and see where things start to dip. Start this tool with an assumption that you'll meet all of your obligations, and then where you see cash shortfalls, then you know, okay, I know I've got to start negotiating for this by this point. I know we've got to get more cash in, whether it be through member loans or other instruments or collecting AR by this point. And you can use this as a tool to really carefully manage what your plans are for your cash flow. And then every week you should update it to make sure to see how your actuals are performing compared to your projections so that you can adjust. The point of a plan is not because you're going to plan the future. The point of the plan is to know what you did plan so that when it doesn't go that way, you know exactly how it didn't go that way, so you know what to adjust to plan for the next step of the future. I will say, like, that's a great tool for helping you identify what your targets are, what your goals are for capital raise if needed, or for cash raise. But if cash is super, super tight, you're really going to need to manage it on a daily basis. You're going to have some very clear controls on when things get paid and whether or not there's money to do it. So I'm going to pause there and hand it back.
Andy and Christina, that fantastic information, so valuable at this moment. Thank you. Now we're going to just shift a little bit to hearing about how some cooperatives are adapting and adjusting to this moment. And we'll go right back to Cornelius Blanding with the Federation for Southern Cooperatives, and then Mo will come back to you. Just a couple minutes each, just to get a sense of what you're hearing from your members in the field. Cornelius.
All right. Well, thanks again, Doug. And so and you heard some of this from Ben earlier, and I'm assuming Ben is still on, because again, I would ask him to jump in as I close down just for that direct voice. But we're adjusting in various ways. One, what we're doing here now, this webinar, this is a new tool for us. We've been using it sporadically over the last year or so, but it's a new tool because of the way our membership is structured. But we're starting to figure out how do we work online, how do we use webinars, and again, this is also practice for us now. So we're developing our systems out to deal with this crisis as we go along. But we're also making sure that we maintain that direct contact. We no longer can go out in the field and do face-to-face meetings with our members, but we're boiling that down to direct phone calls as a second best option. But the third thing is looking at our resources. And I think Christina and Andy mentioned earlier that managing our resources are very important now. Because we are a large contractor with the U.S. government, what things that happen on that level also affect us. So trying to really figure out how to manage those cashes, that cash that's coming in, but also manage our expenses. So we're doing a lot of communicating. We're communicating with our vendors, with our suppliers, with our partners. And one of the things that we've done is we laid out our expenses and our revenue over a 3-month period. And we got as many of our expenses as possible. We've gotten those out the door already. But we're also lining up the revenue that we're expecting over this 3-month period and starting to communicate with our funders and our partners about how do we get that in. We pulled down as much as we could, but we're also working closely with not only those partners, but with folks like Shared Capital in terms of how do we adjust our normal operating procedures? How do we adjust what we have in place now, our line of credits and et cetera? And so working from that standpoint of being very flexible is going to be very important for us. But we also adjust our work. How do we do our work over the phone as opposed to making face-to-face? And what we're telling all of our staff and our members we have to work under the assumption that things are going to be normal soon. And I say that because of this. We don't have the option of not doing anything. If we don't do anything, we know we won't get any money down the road. So what we're doing is saying, here's an assumption that we're going to get paid later. Let's do the work whether we get the money or not, and let's make sure we document everything. And we build our systems accordingly. Even the way we report our templates in terms of how we're reporting, we're adjusting those so they account for phone calls as opposed to face-to-face. We normally do workshops as part of the services that we provide. So we're looking at these webinars as potential workshops and figuring that out. Our challenge, we know, is that many of our members, farmers on the ground, Black farmers in particular, and the co-ops are not using webinars. And so we're trying to build this system out as we learn, use the phone while we're building, but also document everything we do so that we can use that as we move along. Now, on the ground, we're giving the same advice to our membership, to those co-ops, to those farmers, and that, hey, continue to do what you're doing, and especially around farming because it's so time sensitive. They have to have a crop in the ground by a certain time, so they can't delay that. They have to do it, but make the assumption. But we as a federation also have to plan for the worst case. If they don't get paid by some of the folks who they're expecting to get paid for their products, how do we step in? We know right now in terms of what, and Ben mentioned that he sent a memo to me about what's going on the ground with their co-ops. We know that the average co-op is spending about $1,000 a month on expenses with those facilities that include utilities, phone, et cetera. And how to make that up even with the low income that's coming in. And those are things that we're preparing for. But again, right now, we're going to use what we're learning during this crisis. We're going to use all the documentation that we gather. And we're going to use that to negotiate with our suppliers, with our vendors and our partners. But also, we're saying to folks, be prepared to bring your voice to this conversation, the policy conversation. Because right now, many of the resources that are being advocated for are around these loan packages. But as being mentioned, if there's no income coming in, a loan only puts you further in the hole. So you got to figure out how do we be a part of these stimulus packages in other ways beyond just the loans. And so really adjusting our systems, documenting, preparing that things are going to come back online so that we can present everything that we've done in a different fashion, and then making the case for getting finances in the end, and continue to hope that all of our partners, all of our vendors work with us, and folks, and working closely with, again, folks like Shared Capital, who are already starting to adjust and make the policies flexible around the things like line of credits that we have. Ben, I don't know if you're on, but if you're on, if you want to add a piece to that.
Well, we looking at different avenues in the way we can still deliver what we have in the warehouse and what we can harvest in the field. We do have people calling about home delivery. So we're going to look at that as one outcome, but we really don't know what to do at this time, no more than continue to plant for the upcoming season in June and July and August. So we're just looking at any way we can survive.
And let me add one more piece to this, because Ben and I talked a lot about this, and we have these, not only are the supply and some of the customers are slowing down, are drying up, but we have some of the folks in the community, nonprofits and other organizations, who have jumped in to deliver food for kids in the community. And what we have been doing, we've gotten calls, Ben has gotten called, our co-ops have gotten called to deliver food to them so they can deliver. And what they're asking is to donate this food. So not only have these suppliers dried up, but we're starting to donate food for this crisis for children and for the school systems. And that's not accounted for in this equation as well. So there's a big adjustment that we're having to do right now.
Well, thank you, Cornelius. Thanks again, Ben, for those impacts on particularly on farmers in southeastern United States, some really serious impacts. Mo, maybe you can jump back on and talk to us about what you're hearing from some of the worker co-ops, how they are, modifying, adjusting to this extraordinary situation.
Yeah, absolutely. So on I think the next slide, I have a bunch of resources that kind of share the picture of what worker co-ops are doing right now. So number one, on the U.S. Worker website, we have a resource folder of everything that we can find, including some of the how to work remotely. I hear really strongly, Cornelius, like not being used to having online conference calls and webinars and meetings is really, really difficult to acclimate to. So we're trying to help our members through that. A lot of our members are doing a lot of great stuff, everything from just like how to facilitate a meeting online to how to have a karaoke party with all of your workers together so that people can maintain that sense of camaraderie that they've had. So there's a really wide gamut of different resources, and both for the workplace and for relief funds, and every different aspect of how this is affecting all of our businesses. So we're seeing our co-ops adjust really, really quickly, actually. Right here, you're seeing a picture of the Si Se Puede, We Can Do It, which is a really wonderful collaboration that we're seeing from Opportunity Threads and the Cooperative Home Care Associates. I mentioned that they're on the front line because they are home care workers and they're in really big need of personal protective equipment. So Opportunity Threads, a worker co-op in North Carolina, is stepping up to make masks, and they have a fund for people to donate to help fund actually making the masks and the materials for those masks. So we're seeing some supply chain connections, particularly between like some of the food industries, like for instance, Red Emma's is shifting from what was a bar, cafe, restaurant to a delivery service. So they're delivering a lot of the food that they were previously having on site. We're seeing some of our businesses that are kind of like the health and wellness ones that had classes like for fitness or yoga, like Red Fit in New York, or some kind of yoga. They're looking at, they're actually, some of them have started to already host some online classes. So we're always happy to help people figure out how to make stuff like that happen. Some of other businesses are shifting to orders online. And then some really, really beautiful kind of support systems within the movement. Is a really good example is the Seed Commons, which is a commons of grant making across many of our co-op members, both worker co-op and cross-sector co-ops that are giving out loans. But in this particular instance, they have a specific fund just to help the workers during that time. So we're seeing people be really innovative with how they're trying to support each other through this. So the Federation has a page for solidarity opportunities. So the asks and offers for what worker co-ops are doing right now. We're also hosting support and solidarity calls. We're going to have one in Spanish and then one in English on Monday. That is March 30th. And then we're also working on technical assistance. So we know that a lot of our members have actually gone through the process of applying for some of these loans, what we're directing people to do is absolutely apply for the economic injury disaster loans, which I know the NCBA and the Federation and a lot of people on this call are sharing a lot of that information, but absolutely be applying for those loans as soon as you can. Even if you are unsure about it or think that you might get denied, it's still really actually important to apply for those loans, not just to shore up your business, but also to kind of like push that worker co-ops need to be served. So
thank you, Mo. If you could just wrap up, please.
Yeah, absolutely. That was basically it. I also just wanted to give a shout out to the Cooperative Development Foundation for their disaster fund, Shared Capital, obviously, and the Cooperative Fund of New England, all of whom are putting together emergency resources.
Absolutely. Thank you, Mo. We'll just keep moving forward here. Some great ideas, some great resources that the Federation Worker Co-ops has there. Next, just wanted to shift over back to Christina, who also has Ann Fedorchak from the National Co-op Bank on the line, to talk a little bit about working with your bank and with lenders. And I'll mention Christina and Ann if I'm throwing you a little bit of a curveball, that we received a few comments from our housing co-op community that as you're thinking about your comments, if you have anything that is a little bit specific or in the context of housing co-ops, I know there's some folks on the line that would appreciate it, but I think we got just about every sector represented here. So Christina, back to you.
Great, and Ann, feel free to chime in with me here. We wanted to talk a little bit about, for those who have loans from a bank or from a fund, this is one of the critical places that you're probably trying to think about what to do, and so wanted to talk specifically about some options. So we know it's important to communicate. If you have if you're concerned about your ability to make mortgage payments or make a payment on a business loan, to reach out early and be in communication with your representative at the bank or loan fund. And I think, which can be daunting. And I think a lot of us would like to go hide at those moments rather than reach out. But I think the best thing is for them to hear from you and to hear. Here's what you can think about as you're going into that conversation. First, for you to share how you're being impacted. They may or may not know your business well. They may or may not know how you are being impacted. It may be similar to how other businesses they're dealing with are impacted, or it might be very different. So being able to, as clearly as possible, just communicate, how it's affecting you, what's it done to your business operations and future cash or your employees, what have you. Secondly, to really communicate what you're already doing. This is, you're already taking action. So if you could share with them what that is, if you can share how important it is to keep your workers, on payroll, or share the other steps you're taking to make sure that your business your cooperative business can go forward. That's what is helpful for them to know what you're already doing. And frankly, they may have ideas about resources or other things out there. You may not know yet what you need from them, and if you don't, then just keeping them in the loop will pave the way for you to come back when you do know what you need. But if you already know that you're looking, if you've looked at your ability to make that next payment and you have questions about it, or the payment after that, I think you want to specifically let them know that and see what kind of resources are available. Different banks are taking different kinds of actions. Some are sort of proactively rolling out options for all of their businesses. Some are looking on a case-by-case basis. So let them know, if you know what you need, let them know what that is, whether that's that you need some flexibility, how much is impacting your cash. And this is where having that cash flow tool that Andy talked about can really be helpful, because it'll help you articulate most clearly what you're able to do. So, do those things, and then Anne, let me let you chime in with any any additions or different information you want to share.
Sure. Thanks, Christina. I think you and really all the other speakers have really provided some great advice and suggestions, and I would just say, kind of looking at from the commercial banking perspective, the communication is key as far as your lenders often in terms of, what's going on, how things are, going well, which is what you see on the horizon. It relates to, say, line of credit. If you have a line of credit at your bank, letting your banker know, early if it looks like you're going to be needing to draw on it, just so, and when that might be, just so the bank can plan, so the bank can be as responsive to all the customers in terms of what their needs are. And also, as Christina mentioned, in terms of if it looks like there's going to be some challenges, to bring those up early as well, and what they might be. And really, it would be on a case-by-case basis, and would expect that the banker would want to understand what's really behind causing your particular needs. So I would say really more on a case-by-case basis. So it's really assessing the situation, understanding what your needs are in terms of your cash flow, what your current financial condition is, how you see operations being impacted going forward, creating that plan. And, we've talked about communicating that externally to your lenders, but also internally as well as a co-op, because that is important to make sure that you're making the right decision and that everybody's on the same page as a co-op. And in this environment where you've got social distancing, where some businesses are closed, it may be more of a challenge to get everybody together. So making sure that you're doing that in terms of including those needed to make a decision, then also communicating that. So it's, I think, much more
And Anne, this might just be my connection, but I've lost audio from Anne. I think it sounded like she might have been wrapping up. It was I think some really good some great comments by both Christina and Anne in those communication, not only with your lender, but also with other key stakeholders within your co-op. So thank you. The next, and before I go to our next speaker, I do want to mention we will have time for questions and answers. Looking like we may go just a little bit long over our 2 o'clock to make sure that we have an opportunity to do a few of those. But we'll do question and answer right after we hear from Kate Latour, who is our Director of Government Relations at National Cooperative Business Association, CLUSA. And Kate has been on the front line advocating for all cooperatives and being eligible for disaster assistance. And actually, just within the hour, the latest language was released, and Kate's had a chance to look at that, and she'll share that and some other information with us. Kate, hand it over to you.
Sure. Yeah, thank you. So just a quick recap of what has happened. So there have already been 2 packages of legislation passed. The first was really a quick injection of funds to public health administrations and agencies, and then also making available $7 billion in low interest loans at the Small Business Administration. As it stands at this very moment, worker co-ops and small agriculture co-ops are eligible entities. There are some types of co-ops that are currently not eligible, but we are actively working to resolve and optimistic. As Mo kind of mentioned, we are really encouraging co-ops to apply as soon as they can demonstrate economic injury, because SBA will just be experiencing unprecedented demand. And so really just getting in their queue early will be helpful. On NCBA CLUSA's website is a list of forms that you'll need in order to apply for the economic injury disaster loans. So if you wanted to kind of get your materials in order before you begin the application process. The second phase that they passed included tax changes for employers so that the businesses can provide paid sick and emergency leave for their workers, as well as extended leave for workers who care for children whose schools have closed because of COVID-19. So this will be resolved in your taxes when you file, and if it results in a refund, businesses will receive a check from the IRS. The third phase, as Doug mentioned, is hot off the presses. We just received text of the bill as this webinar began. It includes very important language for co-ops, specifically making all small cooperatives eligible entities for SBA's programs. I should specify their emergency assistance program. So not only is every type of co-op eligible, but also in any program where there would be a personal guarantee requirement, that requirement is waived on loans up to $200,000. As many of you know, the personal guarantee requirement has long been an issue at SBA for cooperatives. So this is a really crucial provision that's included. Overall, the small business section of this bill will provide billions of dollars, both in loans and in grants, to small businesses and nonprofits. Grants can be up to $10,000 and loans can be up to $2 million. Both are based on economic injury. So our understanding is that you do not request a specific amount from the SBA, rather they determine the amount that you'll receive from them through this program. So these working capital funds can be used for fixed payments, including mortgage or rent, utilities, and payroll costs, among a number of other allowable uses. So as I mentioned, this is the third phase, and it is still, it's very much under consideration. There, as Doug was handing it over to me, I received a news alert that there are some technical corrections that are still needed, even from what was introduced just moments ago. So we are, again, the co-op language is in there, and we are very optimistic that that is not the problematic part of this bill, so that it should remain in there. So of course, as any legislation, once it passes the Senate, the House will need to pass before the President signs, and then those funds can be made available, and SBA can implement these new policies. But again, I would imagine this will pass pretty quickly, and so I would not have co-ops wait to apply. Again, just getting in the queue early will be really important. A couple other just quick items. The IRS extended the federal tax return filing deadline to July 15th. And then the last item that I will mention is just to make sure you are in touch with your elected officials. Your US senators and your representatives may be able to be of assistance if you're having challenges, particularly with the SBA. NCBA CLUSA is also more than happy to help you navigate that process. And your state and local officials will also be important resources as some changes and additional programs to the response to the outbreak are made on a state-by-state basis. So we know certain states and cities, bigger cities especially, are making different decisions based on utilities and business programs. So really just being in touch with your governor's office, and their website should have up-to-date information. On NCBA CLUSA's microsite on COVID-19, we have links to federal resources, and are updating that information pretty much on a day-by-day basis. So I think those are the big items that I have, and happy to answer any questions related to the federal response.
Hey, thanks for that. This is a very fluid situation in terms of the potential for disaster assistance for cooperatives. Some pretty significant developments today, but I really can't emphasize enough to just to stay in touch and really keep track of developments in these next days and weeks. NCBA CLUSA, U.S. Federation, I'm sure, and others in the co-op community will be working hard to make sure that you get the information out. I'll just mention briefly that, and this might be the third time that that you've heard this, but the importance of applying for the SBA, the loans and grants when they come. I'll also say that SBA is going to have a real challenge in implementing this because this is a sort of an unprecedented scope and scale. We may actually have, and I'm just keeping track, talk about real time. We have someone from the Small Business Administration, David Hincapie, who I think we might be able to ask to come on for a couple minutes to give us an update from his vantage point. John and David, I'm just going to pause for a second and see if David can jump on the line.
Yeah, I see you. Can you guys hear me?
We can hear you, David. All right. Thank you for joining us at such a last minute. If you would, could you take a couple minutes from your vantage point? Tell us if you could remind us where you sit at SBA, and then just share with us what you can this afternoon.
Right. So I'm an economic development specialist in the Washington Metro District of the SBA. So we cover DC and surrounding counties. So as you were saying, everything is very fluid, and I want to give you guys some updates about something that we just confirmed yesterday. When I talked to Kate initially, I told her a little bit about the formula they use for figuring out how much we're going to lend to people, and that's been changed already. We're now looking at working capital loans for 6 months of your working capital. The way is decided is we're going to get the financial information from you, your tax returns, and we're going to look at that, divide by 12, multiply by 6, get you 6 months of working capital. Our goal is to get as many loans out as fast as we can. And so if you need more, if you need to request a higher amount, or if you need to do anything else, that's a second step that we can do, and we'll ask for other information. We'll have to do a deeper look in the financials to do that. But right now, our goal is loans for 6 months of working capital out into the community to business owners so that they can keep their businesses open. So on your end, the important thing is read carefully, double check, take an extra 15 or 30 minutes to do the application right the first time, so that when it gets into the queue, you don't lose your place in the queue when a loan processor comes up to it and says, oh, this is missing this. All right, I'm going to put it over there. I've got this other stack of 1,000 that me and my teammates are got to go through. So I'm going to get to that one when I get to it, right? So you don't want to be that person. So you want to do it right the first time so that you stay in the queue. It's a processing time normally, right, before this, about 3 weeks, and maybe another week to get it funded, to get the money into your bank account. Now you should expect a processing time of 30 days. That's how long it's going to take. I'll give you an update. We have had several 100,000 applications already. The website is currently down while the IT team improves it and strengthens it and makes it more robust so we can handle the tsunami of applications we expect once it's reopened. In the meantime, you can send the paper application. If you send it overnight, complete with everything there, it gets in the queue. Now, usually the electronic application online is the fastest one when the website is working. Because we don't know when the website's going to be up, tonight, tomorrow morning, next Monday, I don't know. That they haven't told us. So I would make a bet if it were me. Can't tell you what to do, but if it were me, I would make a bet. If I've got all my financial information, if I can do this application and get it done today, I'd send it overnight so it gets here, gets in the queue if you're in a hurry.
David, that is fantastic information. So glad that you're able to jump on. David's just been a wonderful conduit for cooperatives with the Small Business Administration, and this, as David said, this information is going to be really fluid, but having this up-to-date current information on how to engage SBA, it's fantastic. I got a lot of sympathy for the team there at Small Business Administration on what they have just been tasked to do. So thank you for all of that. We have some time for questions. We're going to go a little bit long, no more than 10 minutes. We'll be done at 2:10, maybe a little bit before that, but there's a great set of questions that have come in. Folks can send those in via text, and I'll mention that those we don't get to over this next 10 minutes or so. We will be looking at ways to get those addressed, on our COVID website, at the NCBA CLUSA website, or hooking people up specifically with some of the experts that we have here or other experts. So I do want to, there are quite a few questions around housing cooperatives. So I think really A first one, David, this might be a good one for you. Kate, you might have some visibility into it, is whether housing cooperatives are part of, part of the legislative package and vision. And so I'll just pause and see if anyone has an answer to that. And if not, we'll see if we can figure that out in the very near future. David or Kate, perhaps.
This is David. I have no information on that. I've been over on my SBA lane. So in fact, I was going to, after this call, ask Kate for information on that legislation.
The way the legislation is written now, it very clearly states that all cooperative businesses are eligible entities. So I would apply for the assistance and then make the case that, this is where it specifically says all co-ops are eligible.
Yeah, okay, thank you. Thanks for that.
Can I add one little thing
go ahead,
about
David.
this? Regarding the co-ops, you said earlier, and Kate mentioned earlier, that there's co-ops that were supposedly, were ineligible at the time this all started happening, right? But there's so many of them, and in fact, there's the RL Condra from NCB was asking me about the food co-ops, right? And they're consumer co-ops, and they're explicitly, in the old SOP, they're explicitly excluded. However, everybody should apply, and in the application, there's room for a narrative, and in that narrative, they can explain there, we are applying, we are the only, supermarket, grocery store for a 75-mile radius for these people, we need help, right? And all I can say is, if enough of these people apply, and there's a huge enough number, and the need is demonstrated, then policy can change. Policy has already changed, right? It's already changed in response to the magnitude of this emergency. So the co-ops should apply, even if they're on the list of the ones that are ineligible. Apply anyway, because that's the only way policy is going to change, is if they hear about it and hear about the need.
Thank you, David. Yeah, that's a great point. And I think this legislative language, in its plain reading, it makes clear that all co-ops are eligible. Now, this is early on. There's a lot to work out, but I think on that sort of theme of apply, make clear why you think you're eligible, why the need is there, and then make sure that you're in the game for that conversation. I'll bring another question here. This one has to do with startups, actually. Is there for cooperatives that are just starting, maybe they've already been established, any particular resources or ways that they should be thinking? I'm gonna put that back maybe to our lenders, to Christina and Andy. Is there, for those that are just really nascent, just kind of getting off the ground, what should they be thinking about right now?
And feel free to jump in if you've got something. Otherwise, I'll say, I think this is a big question, and we've been talking to others about. I think for cooperative businesses that have started recently and are still very early stage, I think you should be applying for those SBA resources and other resources that may be available in your community or in your state. As an operating business, you are likely eligible even if you recently opened your doors. I do think it will be incredibly challenging for those who are about to open their doors. Maybe you had planned to open your doors in a couple of months. I think that is where you probably can't demonstrate that you were operating prior to the crisis. Then you will have a hard time demonstrating kind of what your working capital needs or or other financing needs would be, and that may need to shift your timeline for opening. But for those who opened previously and are still a young cooperative, I'd say you should be applying as well. I have not obviously read the specifics on where eligibility may sit.
And I will just add that there is language in SBA's application materials that you don't have to necessarily have had opened your doors of your business yet. If you can demonstrate specific things about being in the startup phase, then you can still qualify for these SBA economic injury disaster loans.
Thank you, Kate. Thank you, Christina. I'll go to a next question. We just got time for maybe two more or so. This is one more on a housing or residential co-op. Question is it legal or advisable to ask members of that housing or residential co-op to alert us in advance to potential payment problems. That is, can the management at the housing or residential co-op reach out and say, please let us know if you think you're going to have some problems with your payments this month, and I'll turn that back to the to Ann, to Christina, if you have any take on that.
I don't know if Ann is.
Sure.
Ann is there. Yeah, go ahead.
Sure,
Sorry,
I'm here. Can you? Okay. I would say if that's part of the whole communication, and certainly if it looks like, and what I've been hearing is that there are housing co-ops that are doing just that in terms of trying to get a sense of potential impact on the members themselves. So I think and this is an unusual time, and getting a sense of how that might impact the co-op overall would be good. So that can be part of the overall plan.
Great, thank you, Ann. And I saw Andy and maybe Christina, anything to add to that?
Yeah, I'll echo what Ann just said. I think it's super important to be trying to get as much information as you can, as early as you can, so you can work with folks. I am not a lawyer. When you have legal questions, you should ask lawyers. But I will just, anecdotally say I did used to work in property management in Texas. Rules vary state to state. I am not aware of any reason legally that you would not be able to ask that question and encourage folks to communicate with you. So.
Yeah, that's great. And I would just add that there may be also other resources in states and county resources that can help residents who may be unable to meet their housing obligations. And so by working together with to identify what resources may be out there, you might be able to come at this from both from the cooperative side and from the member side and find some solutions.
Okay, great. Thank you, Christina. Just one more question, then I'm going to have a note about resources. There's quite a few questions about resources, but this one's for SBA. David, if you are still on, the question is, or Kate, maybe in reading the legislation, the working capital loan for that 6-month loan, that's a loan. Actually, they're seeking confirmation that's a loan. Is that correct? And is that, just to be clear, is that a forgivable loan? Can it kind of turn into a grant? Do you know, David?
We have no idea. We keep getting this question. It's funny how it gets just out there and then it comes back to us and we have no idea. Right now it's a loan. Yeah. One detail, there's going to be a 1-year deferment on the first payment. So the first payment won't be due until 1 year after you get the loan. So we don't talk about that too much because the EIDL always had a deferment, but we didn't talk about it too much because the words would go out deferment and somehow people would hear grant. I don't know how it happened, but it did. And so we're not talking about that too much. There will be a deferment. Right now, it's a 1-year deferment on the first payment. Interest does accrue during that 1 year, but it's a 1-year deferment on the payment.
Okay, good, great. Thanks, David, for that clarification. I'll mention that just somebody who's been reading a lot of the news reports around the legislative activity, that there has been some, I'll call it noise. There's been some that have talked about the potential of some of those loans either turning into grants or that there's some type of grant program. And I guess all I can say to that is to this audience is please pay attention to really reputable resources as these developments continue to really move. So we are at time. In fact, we're 10 minutes over. Fantastic. And there was a question on resources to get the SBA forms, resources around other types of funds. What I can say is that I'm asking David right now, or asking Kate to gather whatever resources are linkable, and we'll have them on our COVID, that is NCBA CLUSA COVID-19 I'm sure U.S. Federation of Worker Co-ops are going to have some of this, and some of our other partners will have that. So we're going to be gathering that information, and whatever's linkable, we'll be putting that on as soon as possible, both around SBA as well as other types of funds. There are a number of questions that were not addressed here. I apologize, but we will do what we can to provide that information directly to those folks, and also, as it's if it's general information, we'll be updating our microsite on COVID-19 on NCBA CLUSA. So we're at time. Everybody, stay safe, take care of yourselves, your families, and your staff. And I can just tell you that NCBA CLUSA will continue to work to help the cooperative community support you in any way. Please let us know at NCBA CLUSA if there are other webinar topics in the future that would be helpful. And finally, I want to thank Shared Capital Cooperative for bringing us this idea, for partnering and putting it together. Thank you, Christina. Thank you to all the presenters, and everyone. Have a great day, and we'll stay in touch.